love that this week we're talking about seeing and being seen. And for me, I think it's really easy to talk about vulnerability when we're talking about being seen, right? Being seen by others. But this idea of being seen by ourselves for me was like, oh yeah, that also takes vulnerability. And we don't really think about that as much. Like it takes vulnerability to ask questions, sort of knowing what the answer is going to be, right? Because we know, I mean, we are compacted in all these sort of systems within ourselves and these thoughts and ideas. And some we kind of put in a room somewhere, but we know that they're there. We're just not going to look at them right now. And so it takes vulnerability to ask these really important questions. One, to be willing to ask the question, because then once we're willing, then we actually have to look at the thing. And some of those questions may be, are there things that I'm carrying around that I don't need to be carrying around? Are there things I haven't looked at that I need to look at? Are there biases that are like directly impacting others in my life? I mean, these are really important questions. And sometimes they're hard questions because sometimes the answer is yes. And so then when we become aware of it, then we're like, oh, okay, now we have to begin this sort of work of bringing those to the surface and working through those. And so for me, I think that's like the lost conversation about vulnerability is that vulnerability with ourselves and asking ourselves those really key questions.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Was that one of your thoughts?
Yeah, that was literally going to be my first thought. We so often talk about, the personal journey, the inner work, the deep dive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I really hear it talked about often as vulnerability, but that's maybe that's the most vulnerable place to like have to admit the things, the stories, the habits, the patterns, the whatever, the things that we're like try and pretend we're not aware of.
Right.
Or I don't know. I mean, I think it's a little bit different for everybody, but I think we've all got something. Like we've all got that thing about us that we'd rather not have, rather not talk about, rather not see. And that takes a lot of vulnerability to and then maybe this brings us back to the beginning, right? But that takes a lot of vulnerability to look at like whatever shame or story there is around whatever that thing is, right? Like and to think, so we can't have a relationship with other people without being vulnerable. And we're going to have a relationship as connected to the degree that we are willing to be vulnerable, right?
Right.
And to realize that that's also true with ourselves. And I know. Right. Everybody just take a deep breath. It's okay.
I know. I had to breathe a few times, even thinking about it.
And I think just because we don't talk about it, just because we don't name it, doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So I think there are a lot of people who have done a lot of personal work who have explored what essentially is that personal vulnerability, that the vulnerability with ourselves. But there's something about naming it today as that just like, oh, I don't know. It just had this like.
Well, it's like even like the idea of a piece of it too is personal responsibility. And so we're talking about how this shows up in communities. And so, like, I don't know that gets talked about enough, like taking responsibility for how my decisions and how I show up impacts others. And that's really important in this idea of community and this vulnerability within community. I think we don't want to look at that, and we want to. So often we see, our default is to blame something else, blame external, blame whatever this external thing. But they really begin to take personal responsibility for the things that are ours to take responsibility for, mainly how we are showing up and how we are engaging with others and how we are creating community, or how maybe sometimes we're a barrier to that.
How engaging in that communal kind of relationship, like people do become our mirror. They become our reflection of and our resistance to vulnerability then is I'm resistant to the part of me that I see in you bringing up for me, right? Like, so you may or may not actually be that thing,
but you're triggering something.
You're bringing up for me all the thoughts and feelings about the thing that I don't. And that's just the nature of of relationship, right? I mean, I think people call, people talk about it like it's law of attraction or whatever, and like whatever, law of attraction. I don't know, but we are definitely going to find ourselves in those relationships that bring up those things in us, because that's where our growth is. And
Right.
that doesn't mean we don't have other relationships that don't. They just don't stand out like the ones where we're having our shit triggered. Like if
Right.
your shit's getting triggered in this thing, yeah, that's going to be really memorable. That's going to feel really important and really big. And so yes, we do bring ourselves to situations with people that bring that stuff up, because our patterns and our habits create and recreate those same scenarios where we are then finding ourselves in relationship with, in any kind of relationship, right? This is
Right.
not just like, love relationships. It could be anything. We do find ourselves in those repeating relationships with those people that bring up those same things. Like
Yeah.
we will find ourselves there. And I think it does. It just, yeah, it takes a massive amount of vulnerability, not all at the same time, thank God, but it does take, like, it takes quite a bit of vulnerability with yourself to just start seeing the role, like the
Yeah.
role that I play in those repeating relationships.
Yeah.
And it's not like once you realize it once, it stops immediately, because we are unlearning.
Are
We're
you
trying to
sure? No, I'm just teasing.
well,
I wish.
right. Um, and so it's been interesting in my life to see, especially like there's like that one reoccurring role that, but to see the evolution of that over the last however many years, and how different it is now, and how less sucked into it I can feel now than
It's like a different person, same person, different hair.
right.
It's that same presence
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah. And the vulnerability that it requires to even engage in that,
Yeah.
100%. Like, yes, I mean, this is not to say that that person engages in great relationship behavior, right? In the different iterations of who they've been, and this is like a work thing, right? Like,
Right.
well, mostly. um, but the different ways that they have shown up in different roles, like it's literally been a different person showing up in different
Mm.
ways. But it has started with me needing to see, like, what is it about that role? Like, why do I keep finding myself in this place with that type of person?
Yeah.
Um, and that, yeah, that takes the willingness to see that slowly, as non-judgy as possible.
Well, and I like, the part that you talked about, switching to that, like seeing, uh, switching from seeing ourselves and seeing others. It's like, don't we see others. I do this. I'll just say me. Like sometimes we see others the way we want them to show up.
Mm,
Right? And so then it just impacts everything, because when we're
yeah,
trying to like mold people into this, whether it's how we want them to show up in the world, or how we think things should look or show up in a community, or how we want someone to, show up in our own like sort of personal needs. And when they don't do that, then it becomes this weird space where we've kind of cut off vulnerability and authenticity on their end, thus impacting vulnerability and authenticity on our end, because then it just gets squidgy. And
yeah,
so really being able to see people as they are, who they are, right?
yeah,
Without judgment, which as much as possible, which is really a challenging thing to do. But that's what we're talking about. It's like seeing people for who they are and for
yeah,
what they are.
yeah,
And sometimes our expectations of people are so high that no one could ever meet any of those things, right? So that
yeah,
everyone's always
yeah,
going to fail because we have these expectations that we try to shove people into.
yeah,
I personally do that. I'm sure I'm not alone in this. And so I really love this conversation about seeing people for who they are.
yeah,
And that doesn't mean that we have to open up or be vulnerable or whatever. If we see them for who they are, and it's
right,
not a space where we can be our authentic selves or we can be safe, boundaries are also an important piece of vulnerability. And I think we've
yes,
talked about that throughout
yeah,
this, but even more importantly, in allowing people to be who they are. But that doesn't mean that then people get to run rampant in our lives in a way that's not healthy for us.
I think we have to be I don't know, careful or whatever. Like when we say like, we see people as they are, I think that can also be used as like, we see people as they are. We see the truth, like like, right. And I think that can get really bypassy.
Yeah.
And I also think, we see the truth of them. We see them as they are can also mean the other extreme of like seeing the story. And so I think it is a really nuanced kind of, I'm not exactly sure what we would
Well, it
call it,
takes
but
discernment, right? Just
yes.
like
And I think it's also important, like for us, not just you and I, but us, for leadership to kind of redefine what it means when we say certain things like that can easily be super spiritually bypassy or like super caught up in the thick of life.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's neither. It's actually this beautiful balance in the middle where we can see the I don't know, the essence, whatever word we like,
Right.
that, that part of us that is, like we are part of the whole, we are all one, and we are this unique expression. We can see that and also not walk around with like blinders on, pretending that everyone is this I don't know, version of goodness that we would like them to be, right? Like there is this like a dual perception, right? Because we can see that truth, and see them for where they are at in their journey on that, without judgment, without being like, oh, they haven't figured it out yet. No, it's like, oh, okay, I see they're engaging in behaviors that are outside of my boundaries, and so that's okay. I mean, not making whatever they're doing okay or not, but that's okay that that's where they're at. Not judging them for it, but just recognizing like, yes, there is potential for them to not be the way that they're acting, and they are still acting the way they're acting.
And that we're all in this process, right? And we're all at different stages of it.
And I wish there was an easier way to describe that. There probably is. But like, yeah, it is a nuanced thing. I think in a lot of ways we make stuff overly complicated in one direction.
Right.
And it's a lot simpler than it is. And at the same time, there's often a lot of nuance to it, that it's not just, it's not just seeing them how they are. It's like, yes, it is. It is. We see them how they are. We see them for what it is. And
we make decisions that are in alignment with us living our best selves and our most expansive and true selves too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for being here for this conversation, this continued conversation about vulnerability, and today, seeing and being seen. What a critical and important part of being vulnerable. And I certainly have a new perception and appreciation for seeing and being seen, which is something we take very seriously here at Soul Evolution Collaborative. So if you are looking for a spiritual community of people who are also looking to see you and be seen, you can come check out The Gathering on Thursday nights, which is a space we have created just literally specifically for that, like for seeing each other, for being seen, for sharing in this spiritual journey, this journey of life that we are all on. So if you are looking for more of a conversation like this, check that out. And if you are looking for that and other stuff, there is plenty of other information and videos and in events and things going on that you can also check out at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. So thanks again for being here this week and being part of this conversation. We'd love to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, give a comment. We'd love to hear from you what your experience with vulnerability has been. So if we don't see you on Thursday, we will see you here next week for another episode of Truth Be Told 2.0.